Are you a farmer or butcher ready to master direct-to-consumer marketing and meat success? Then you're in the right place. I'm Jared Hawken, the founder of Chop Local. Each episode of this podcast features interviews with farmers and butchers who have built successful direct-to-consumer meat businesses, and they're going to share their secrets for success with you. From actionable tips to inspiring stories, this podcast has ingredients you will need to succeed in the meat business. After the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on social. And check out the rest of our educational resources at choplocaluniversity.com. Now, let's turn it over to my business partner, Katie, to get started.
Before we get into this next episode, I wanted to let you know about one of our other resources that we offer. If you are in a hurry to see meat marketing results fast, then the Meat Commerce Essentials course is perfect for you. It covers everything that you need to know to sell meat online successfully, and it's presented in short video snippets to get you the info that you need to put into action as quickly as possible. For a limited time, we're offering our podcast listeners $100 off the course using coupon code POD100. That's POD100. Just visit choplocaluniversity.com to find the course and be sure to enter POD100 at checkout. Hi everyone, it's Katie Olthoff, the co-founder of Chop Local and Chop Local University, and I'm excited for this episode of the podcast because my guest and I have been chatting now for 25 minutes before we even pressed record, because Stephen Ussery from Stewards Unlimited, my guest today, is just a good buddy and such a wealth of knowledge about agricultural programs and businesses in general. So welcome, Stephen, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. And the love and respect goes both ways. I think my business would not be where it is without Katie. You've been one of probably the biggest impacts, especially when I was first getting started. Made a lot of really good connections, gave a lot of really good advice. So I'm excited to be on the podcast and continue adding value to your audience.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm always glad to hear when something that we've done has made an impact. And, we work a lot with farmers and butcher shops, obviously, but when we can work with professionals like you who also support them, then that is really rewarding. So tell everybody just a little bit about what you do and how you work with those farmers and butcher shops.
Yeah, definitely. So Stewards Unlimited, we are a business consultancy that really specializes in grant writing. So primarily, a new person will come to us when there's an opportunity that they're exploring. They don't really know if it's a good fit, and they want some advice on, is this relevant for my business? And if it is, how? And how can I be competitive for this grant application? We really do a lot of USDA, but we also work on state level programs or private programs. And we take people through from beginning to end, from evaluating, we help them design a project, we write the application, we manage the process. We find that a lot of people are pretty smart at what they do, right? They're good business people. They know their business in and out, but it's pretty overwhelming to consider going and spending the time looking for grants or managing a tedious application process on top of their regular work. And so we get to partner with them. And we like our name Stewards Unlimited because we like to be stewards of our clients. We also think that stewards are humans are the stewards of creation, and nobody does that more than farmers and ranchers. And so that's why we really enjoy supporting and helping people who are doing values-driven production to grow their businesses.
Yeah. And I know we've received a couple of USDA grants. I will just put it out there that Stephen did not write these grants for us, but he did advise us on them. And I was just sharing a couple of the things that I learned early in the process, tips that Stephen gave us about writing our grants that were super, super helpful. But, my background is in communications. I consider myself to be a writer. I love to plan out these types of big projects that are required for a grant, but that's not everybody's skill set, right? And so that's why I think it's great that they have somebody like you that they can come to for help with that.
Yeah, I love that perspective too, because I think especially with a lot of professional services, there's kind of this weird air of I could do it, right? But also you're the business owner. Your time is really valuable, and you could probably do any part of your business, but in order to grow, in order to scale up, you have to be able to hand pieces of it off. And so we really like working with people who are good and are comfortable to kind of give up a piece of their business.
Yeah, that hits me right here because like I am totally like I want to do it myself every time. Like I want to learn how to do it, but you're absolutely right. There are times when it's definitely worth it to hand it off. So let's talk a little bit about grants. When Chubb Local started in 2020, after the pandemic, there was like a huge focus on local foods and small meat processors. And part of that was because of the disruptions that we'd seen during the pandemic. It seemed like there were grants at the state and federal level coming everywhere, a lot of funding going towards local foods. Now, I think you'll agree, we have seen some of that pullback over the last couple of years. And I think at the beginning of 2025, there was a lot of uncertainty about what this new administration would do regarding grants. But the good news is that we see some of those long-standing programs like the Value Added Producer Grant. The administration seems to be in support of those. It seems like that is going to come out, that application or request for proposals is going to come out again soon, and that long-standing program is going to be funded. And then also we've heard recently that there is maybe an opportunity for small meat processors in a new grant, or not necessarily a new grant, but a new iteration of a previous grant. So tell us a little bit about these grants that you're expecting to come out in the next couple of months for both producers and meat processors.
Definitely. I might start with the meat processor one because I have probably less to say about that. But the MPEP, the Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program, that is one that we're expecting to come out, within the next couple of months to next year. And it's really going to be focused on meat processing. We've had 3 rounds of this in the past. I'm pretty sure it was funded through the Inflation Reduction Act, but I'm not exactly sure. But they tend to focus on larger scale products. There was a smaller version of this called the Local MCAP grant, and that was maybe more of your smaller scale butcher shops, and if you just need one piece of equipment. These MPEP ones do tend to prioritize some of these larger scale projects, and in the past they funded both the construction of facilities, large scale equipment purchasing, really a lot of those expansion costs that are not as common in many grants. And we've seen it be announced pretty widely, and so we know that it's coming, and that's all we know. So we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we bring it up now to say that in the past, in order to be eligible for the grant, you had to have a feasibility study completed. And so I bring it up now because what happened the first time it was announced is I had probably 40 people reach out and say, hey, can you help me write this grant? And I think there was like a 30 to 60 day window of time to submit your application. And 30 to 60 days is not enough to get a feasibility study done. And so if you're interested in something like this MPEP grant, you can look at what the previous awards were. You could look at kind of examples, but generally it's going to be about expanding your processing capacity, building a new building, investing in new equipment. You need to likely be processing for more than just one producer, right? So offering that as a service to a broader region. I would begin reaching out to people now to work on a feasibility study. One, because business planning is never a waste. I think that the processing business model already is very difficult, has pretty thin margins. And so you want to make sure before you invest in growth that you have a really good plan in place. And 2, because it might be required even to apply. And anybody who has that, not only will they be eligible, but they're going to be ahead of the curve to be competitive for the grant. So I have a lot of people that I recommend. I also really like the Flower Hill Institute. They provide free technical assistance, and they have a pretty extensive list of advisors that they are happy to connect you with about meat processing. And so I would strongly recommend reaching out to them. Again, I would be happy to recommend people as well, but start having some of those conversations now, because if you wait until it's announced, you're not going to have enough time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Flower Hill has a lot of resources. I'm already seeing their emails come out about this MPEP, coming out, and information about, getting a feasibility study and things like that. So a feasibility study is kind of like big business plan, right? I mean, it's like a business plan, and you're just saying, if I do these things, will I have these outcomes? Am I kind of summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is that a business plan can be more internal, right? It's more like this is what we are going to do. And a feasibility can be more of a third party, where it's somebody looking on from the outside saying, is the idea even possible? So business plan might be more operationally focused, and then a feasibility study can look a little bit broader. But they have probably 80% the same content and materials.
And this feasibility study has to be done by a third party, right? You can't just write it yourself and say, we did a feasibility study for this grant.
That's how it has been in the past. We don't know because it hasn't been announced if this will even be a requirement, but usually the best people who are going to work on it, they likely are going to want to be somewhat collaborative, right? So they're going to be responsible. You would want to have a third party be involved in some way, but they want you to, they're going to interview you as part of the process, right? They're going to take a lot of your input, and you're going to be also helping to direct what the content is, but they're going to be putting kind of their seal of approval on, is this actually a good idea? Because then that adds more validity rather than, you know, if it's your baby, you might be presenting it a bit more pie in the sky than somebody who's impartial.
I can totally relate to that. You know, because you want to be optimistic, especially as a business owner, and in, you know, a lot of these businesses that we're talking about are low margins, right? I think if you're not optimistic, it can be really hard to keep going, but it is important to have that outside perspective. And like you said, business planning is never a waste. That is one of the things that I've actually really liked about writing grants for Chop Local, for our organization, is that it really makes me sit down and think, okay, what are our goals? What are our dreams? What do we wish that we could do if we had more funding, you know? And then what kind of results do we expect from that? And then does it fit into the grant? And I think one frustration that I hear from producers and processors a lot is that you can't usually use the grants for equipment. But this is an exception if it is the way that, you know, it has been for the previous 3 times that it's been released. You can use it for building a new building or making large equipment purchases.
Yeah, exactly. Normally, like capital infrastructure projects are not allowed, or equipment purchases are not allowed. So it's a pretty rare opportunity. But I completely agree. I like the grant. I like to think of a grant as a business plan with a time limit. And so it can be very tactical, right? What's the next bottleneck that we can solve in our business? And how can this grant help to do that? But if you're just chasing grants because they're free money, I've seen that really bite people, where then, you know, you're running, but you're running in the wrong direction, or you spend a lot of time working out the details on something that long-term is not aligned with your business models.
So when you said these are for bigger processors, give us examples of what you've seen MPEP be used for in the past, and what, you know, we're talking USDA processors. Do they have to be USDA inspected? Do you know? Or has it been in the past?
I do not actually know if it had to be USDA, truth be told.
Yep. So, but it's probably not a custom exempt, you know, like you said, it's not like you're on farm processing for yourself and it's a custom exempt type operation or something like that.
That's not been my impression. I think that's why they had that other grant. The local MCAP was more for that smaller scale producer, or like doing on-farm processing or a butcher shop, whereas these MPEPs are more about how do we just increase resilience in the processing, so they want just like volume. Or if you're in an area where there's just no other processors, right?
Yep. And if I'm remembering right, so the total award funding in the past, I believe the maximum award amount would be $1 million. And that was up to half of the total project costs. So we're talking about pretty big projects here, right?
Yeah. But again, for a processor, that honestly is pretty small. When you're at that scale, right? That can be a drop in the bucket for a lot of these facilities.
Okay. And so then matching funds, was there a matching funds requirement for this, or just that, I guess if it's only up to 50% of the project cost, you're expected to fill in that other 50%. So it kind of is like a match fund.
Yeah, the rest then is match.
Okay. All right. So cool. So for processors who have a big dream of expanding or new equipment that's in that, 500,000 to maybe $2 million project type thing or larger, you could get up to $1 million towards that project potentially through MPEP. But start working on your feasibility study right now. And all of that to say that we really don't know what the details of this are going to be. We are basing this off of what has been released in the past, right?
Yeah, but just to reiterate the idea that if you wait until we have more details, every person you call is going to be too busy. And that's what happened last time. And so it'll take you a couple weeks because you'll reach out to 3 people. It'll take them a week to get back. Then you'll try to get a call scheduled. So just start the process today. Send one email and to Flower Hill and get the ball rolling, and you'll be thanking yourself.
Yeah. And I would also encourage processors to start thinking, if I bought this piece of equipment, it would help me process X more pounds of this, or serve this many more producers, or generate this much more revenue, or all of the above. But you really need to start thinking about, if I did this project, what are the potential outcomes, and how can I show the grants committee that this is a worthwhile investment for them, because it's going to impact the farmers, because it's going to impact my local community, it's going to impact my ability to create more jobs. All of those types of things, right?
Yeah, and being able to put numbers to everything is really some of the art behind grant writing, and making educated guesses at times. I think sometimes people want to have an exact number, and I think it's admirable to want to be honest, right? But sometimes you have to make an educated estimate and kind of like be able to run with that and build projections off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so any other advice for processors that might be thinking about this grant opportunity coming up, or have we covered most of it?
Yeah, I'm careful not to get too far over my skis, because it could be announced and I'm completely wrong. So happy to chat again, or after it's announced. I'll do a quick plug we have a free grant alert system where if you go to our website and you say that you're interested in grants related to processing, every week we send out emails about different grant opportunities we come across. A lot of weeks it's like 10 to 15 different things that we're sending out nationwide. So you hopefully would only receive maybe 1 or 2 of those, but we would then let you know as soon as it's actually been announced and we have more details. And if you want to talk through the details, we provide just a free conversation around that to see if it's actually a good fit for you or not. I would recommend signing up for that so that you know when it's actually officially been announced.
Yeah, and that's stewardsunlimited.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right, so the other big opportunity that we think we are anticipating is an annual grant that we've done webinars about this before, but hopefully we're going to be hearing about it again soon, the Value Added Producer Grant. And normally, from what I remember, I thought it always comes out in February-ish, maybe due in May, but we're hearing through the grapevine that it might be coming out a lot earlier, like possibly even in December and being due in maybe February.
Yes. So Value Added Producer Grant, one of my favorites all time. I think it's the number one opportunity for most of your listeners. I'd say most people who are selling anything direct to consumer, it's probably the number one opportunity because it provides working capital infusion into your business, and it provides working capital for market expansion. Whereas a lot of grants want you, like the MPEP, it needs you to provide a 50% match to do something completely new or like this big expansion. So you need a lot of capital. The VAPG, it does require a match, but it's focused on kind of the natural expansion of your business and customer base, and can be really incremental, which is amazing. And it really aligns with most people's business models, especially for like farmers and ranchers, where you have so much money tied up in your animals, right? And in your inventory, and you just need a little bit more working capital to help you float that so that you can expand. Every year they say that it's going to be announced in November and due in February, and then it kind of gets pushed back. And then, like you said, a lot of times it's actually announced in maybe February and then due April, May. As of now, they're saying that it's going to be announced in mid-December and then due maybe within 90 days after that. So we're expecting, and every year we are prepared for it to be due in February, because we go through about a 2-month process with people. And so if you, again, with most grants, you'll hear me say this same thing. If you're waiting until something's announced, usually you're waiting too long. And so one is having a business plan in place, be thinking about your business critically, so that then you're prepared to see if a grant is applicable for you. And then two is, for some grants like the Value Added Producer Grant, it's 99% the same each year. And so we actually work on it year round, and we use different prices based on if people want to work on it during the summer when, we have lots of time to work on it, versus if people reach out a month before it's due, usually we can't even work on it with them because it's too short of a time frame. And so we really encourage people to be thinking about it critically and then getting ready ahead of time. And we are expecting this year for it to be due, like you said, probably February or March.
Yeah, so it's time to start thinking about it. Okay, so Value Added Producer Grant cannot be used for production practices for live animals, right? So like I talked to a guy at a conference last week who wants to be able to graze corn stalks and cover crops because that's going to add, have feed value for his cattle, but he needs to put in fencing and waters, or he wants to do like an electronic fence type of like the collars, basically. And he said, I might apply for this grant. And I said, no, those are production practices. Those are helping you with your animals. That is not applicable. That is not going to work in Value Added Producer Grant. However, he has processing costs. He sells at a farmer's market. He's got transportation costs for that meat once he sells, So those marketing, he's got an e-commerce platform. Those marketing costs, he could use Value Added Producer for his marketing costs, correct? And what you've seen work probably more than me, but by offsetting the marketing and processing costs, then he might have the funding, he might have free up some capital to go ahead and invest in fencing or whatever it is. So give us some more examples of how you've seen producers, specifically meat producers, use Value Added Producer Grant to grow their business, because it's not on the actual buying new animals, putting in fence, buying hay, anything like that.
Right. So like you said, none of it can be on the production side. It all has to be at the point of processing on. And usually we see kind of 5 key categories that people are spending money on. Starting at the beginning, it can pay for fat cattle that are ready to go to the processor. So you can't buy calves that you then raise or finish out yourself, right? Because that's a production related expense. But it can buy cattle that are sent directly to the processor, processed, and then sold under your brand. And so that can be really helpful for people who are already kind of at their capacity, but they want to invest in growth into a new market. And it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? Of should I start raising more animals now, or should I start marketing to get the customers first? And so it can help you kind of overcome that gap where it can help buy some animals as you can't produce them yourselves until you have time to then be catching up your own production. As long as you are always producing at least 50% of the animals that are in the project, more than 50%, I should say, you're fine. So that can be a really big part of the budget, is purchasing additional animals.
Yeah, I see that. I get that question from grass-fed beef producers, because they're like, it takes me a really long time to finish out these grass-fed beef. And if I finish out too many of them and I don't have a market for them, I can't capture the value that I need from taking them to the sale barn, But if I don't start enough of them and I do have a market for them, then I'm stuck, and I can't, I could possibly sell more, but I don't have the animals. And so in this way, they could produce what they're producing, but then potentially buy more animals from other grass-fed beef producers that are ready to go to help fulfill market demand.
I love that too, because I find I work with two types of ranchers in general, and like half of them, they love that direct to consumer element. They love engaging with their customer and providing the face to face. They got the newsletter on lock. And they're great at it. And kudos to them, because the other half never want to speak to a person. They just want to stay on the farm. They want to be with the animals, and they never want to speak to a customer at all. And this actually can help both of them, because it can help the person who enjoys that marketing aspect more to pay top dollar, like for those animals that are being grass fed by somebody who doesn't really want to engage directly with the customer who's willing to pay a premium for their product. But the grant can still be paying that premium price because it recognizes the value, because the person who's selling it direct to consumer can show, this is what I'm getting for it. I'm still making money, even though I'm paying higher than what you'd pay at, the sale barn.
Yep. So that's number one, is you can buy finished animals. This would also be a great way for somebody who potentially raises pork but wants to offer beef also, that could purchase finished beef from somebody else, right?
Yes, it could. I am pretty partial. There are 3 different types of VAPGs. One's a planning grant, one's a new market, like an emerging market grant, and then one's a market expansion. And so I almost always do market expansion grants, which means that you've been selling this particular product for over 2 years. And I find that is way easier to really demonstrate, what you're doing. You have you can kind of project out your sales based on your historic sales, things like that. And so I find that those people are a lot more competitive for the program, because they're just expanding something that's already successful. And so if you're starting something completely new, then you would apply for one of the other 2, and it does get a little bit harder, but it's still very doable.
This reminds me, Stephen, that you and I need to meet off the podcast again, because our annual survey that we do to producers across the country definitely shows that if you are selling more than one type of meat, your sales are higher than the people who are selling just one type of meat. We've got some survey data that could help you in writing these grants to show what would happen if we add another type of meat, or if you add something like shipping or, things like that. So anyway, we'll have to get deeper into that another time. But all right, so use of the funds again. Number 1 was buy more animals. What's number 2?
Number 2 is just the processing itself, right? So it can pay for processing. For usually, if you're going to work with a contract processor, it just pays for the contract fee. I should say that, right, the whole grant is a cost share, so it only covers 50% of the cost, so it's not paying for all the processing. But likely, if you were going to be expanding your sales anyways and selling 10 additional head this year, and it can pay for half of the processing for those 10 additional head, you mentioned earlier the idea of it's just creating additional cash flow into the business, and then that creates more liquidity that you can turn around and put into other parts of your business. If you were going to be paying for the processing for those 10 head anyway, getting half of it covered by a grant is a really great way to just bring cash into the business. So that's the second big one, is processing. If you are a producer processor, you can still pay for processing labor. You could pay for like equipment maintenance, a lot of the costs associated with processing if you're doing it yourself. There are some rules around, you can't pay family members. If you have your ranch and your processing business as 2 different business entities, you can't pay the processing fee to your other entity directly because you own it, right? So there are some sticky rules that I won't get into too much right now, but overall, you can usually cover most of the costs of processing. That's number 2. Number 3 are labor positions. So that could be in processing, but labor, the biggest ones we'll see are things like fulfillment. If you are expanding your shipping, or if you're selling through farmers markets, it could be the labor for the person who's going and selling at the farmers market. Or if you're doing shipping, it would be shipping it out, or somebody who's just doing like sales. If you sell to restaurants, somebody who's calling the restaurants, doing the customer relationships. So I love the VAPG because more than anything, I think it's been the first time I'll see a lot of really successful people invest in a team. It's the first time many people invest in marketing, which is good. But even more than marketing, I love when I see people investing in a team. It's really hard, right, to find the right people and to expand beyond yourself. But it's the people who have really successful businesses that have grown. One of the number one things they say they're grateful for and they wish they had done sooner is bringing on other people, because as soon as you can take off the hat yourself, you get to focus on higher level business decisions. You get to really focus on expansion rather than getting caught in the weeds of kind of like the day-to-day implementation. And so it's hard to give up those customer relationships, but this grant can really make it viable because it's bringing in additional cash so you can pay somebody well and you can get a really high quality person who's not just doing the bare minimum to get a paycheck. You're finding somebody who really aligns with your values, who understands your customer base, who wants to do a good job and is wanting to invest for the long term. So those staff positions are the third big cost that we'll see. The fourth big cost is marketing. So like I said, this is probably the first time a lot of people invest in marketing, and it can pay for somebody like a marketing firm or contractor who is an expert and can come in and help you really get stuff set up and, provide the know-how. Or it can pay for a marketing staff member, somebody like who could be on your team as an employee who does your social media or does like content development on the farm. Or it could pay for things like paid advertising. So if you do paid ads on Facebook, Instagram, Google, if you wanted to run a radio ad, if you wanted to print flyers and, anything that you could spend money on for marketing, not anything, but a lot of things, it can cover that. And this, again, is a program where we'll see people for the first time, they've had a lot of natural growth just through word of mouth. And then they kind of like throw some gasoline on the fire for the first time, actually getting a marketing budget and trying that out. And we see really, really rapid growth with that.
Yeah. I don't have to argue too heavily on that either, right? But I mean, I would totally agree that putting it towards marketing budget makes a lot of sense. Again, if I go back to our survey data, it's showing that the farms who are investing in marketing, their sales are showing it. And we know anecdotally from the things that we do with helping our farmers with email marketing, and more recently we're doing a lot of ads management, and seeing the results from that has just been so, again, it's very rewarding and very fulfilling, but definitely somewhere where I could see somebody putting some of these funds to really help them grow their business.
I really like marketing too, because even a lot of times people will come to me to apply for the grant and they haven't done any marketing. And so we'll be like, all right, here are some people you can speak to about marketing. And they go and they get a quote. And then there's almost like this attitude of, all right, and then we'll wait and see if we get the grant. If we do, then we invest in it. And that's one way to approach it. But I think the most successful people that we see are people who start that process. And after they meet the marketer, they start working on things right away. And so then the idea is you're getting things in place, similar to what we talked about before. It's not like you go from never having done marketing and then, you get a grant and the next day you're operating at 100%. There's kind of like this ramp up period where you need to be able to work through kind of like a onboarding and scaling up, figuring out what works well for your business before you start pumping, can really start pumping it out. And so the most successful people are those who are speaking with a marketer and they're able to start working in a small way and building up over time. And so similarly, I would say do it now, reach out now. I know that Katie provides excellent marketing services. We've worked with a number of the people who've worked with her and have nothing but amazing things to say. And so would definitely recommend reaching out to Katie and starting that conversation, even if you're not going to apply for the Value Added Producer Grant.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we had one farm that we'd worked with that we met, must have been right around the first of the year last year, because they were applying for Value Added Producer Grant, and we sat down and we put together a a marketing plan. It wasn't super detailed and specific, but we put together some ideas and we looked at what they were currently doing. And like you said, they were able to build on it a little bit throughout the year. They applied for Value Added Producer Grant, and then when they found out that they got it in October, they raised Thanksgiving turkeys. Plus, there was a government shutdown, So we have not done that ramp up thing, but they had put in place some of the things that we discussed, like more email marketing and things like that they could do on their own. And then when we sat down this fall and I showed them some of the numbers of what they could expect from adding advertising in, and I know that this farm has a great reputation. They have a great customer base already. They are ready to scale up. We started looking at what they could do with paid ads, and this farmer was just so excited. So I'm also really excited. We're going to launch here probably after the first of the year with ads, and I'm excited to see what the results are going to be.
I think the VAPG is a life-changing program, right? You can apply for $250,000 and then you can go back multiple times, right? So I think even just getting that once would change my life and changes the business for sure. But then also this idea of just investing in new support, new staff members or new people who can work with you, new marketing, any one of those by themselves is life-changing.
And what I love about the marketing category, or at least the way that I try to approach it, is we try to look at marketing techniques that, anytime you gain a customer, you hope that they're going to stay with you for a really long time, right? But yes, I'm a proponent of running ads, but I'm also a huge proponent of getting people on your email list, because that is something that's going to have a residual effect even after this grant period is over. If they're still on your list and they stay a customer longer than that, maybe I shouldn't make this argument, but if you use the entire grant towards processing animals that you were planning on processing and you already had a market for anyway, yes, that's nice. It's still $250,000, right? But I feel like if we think about how we gain new customers from that, there can potentially be that exponential growth over time. So
yeah, and I think that ties in really well to the idea of as you grow, there's such a huge value to identifying who your ideal customer is. I think a lot of people, when they start out, you just take any customer you can get because you just need the sale.
You just need money, right?
Right. But probably if you reflect on it, like the 80-20 principle is that 20% of your customers probably take 80% of your time, where it's just like, wow, why we would be so profitable if everybody was like these people over here, but we have just like a couple of people who just take so much time and money and it really prevents you from getting out of the weeds. And I think marketing is really useful for that because one, any marketer worth their salt is going to make sure that you actually have identified who you're targeting, right? Because you can't really market to everybody. So you have to be kind of specific. Who are we focusing on as a part of this effort? And through that process, you kind of are forced to articulate. There's like a forced accountability. And that's why I like technical assistance, is that I get to come in and just ask people hard questions. And they know the answers, right? You know it, but there's a kind of accountability when somebody's saying, I need to write this down. So you have to give me something really succinct that I can write down. And so it forces you to think through, who do I actually want to serve? Who are my ideal customers? And how do we attract more of them? And then as you're growing, you're finding more and more of your ideal customers. And sometimes that's hard because you're losing some of the people that you started out with. But a lot of times that's going to help you to serve more people better in the future and be able to provide for your family, take care of your land and animals long term and have a stronger business overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It is hard sometimes when you realize that these people that are your customers that maybe you feel really close to, maybe they've been at the farmer's market every week for years, but you've decided that farmer's market is not the way that you're going to grow your business because of, family demands and things like that. Or you're going to hire somebody to be there instead and you're going to miss that personal connection. But you can maybe serve your community or serve your whole customer base as a whole, serve your business, like you said, better by kind of letting that go and focusing on what makes the most sense. So, yeah. It is, I will say though, for anybody listening who's like ideal customer profile, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago and somebody asked a direct-to-consumer farmer, who's your ideal customer? And she's like, anybody who eats meat. And they were like, yeah, but no. And she's like, okay, not the bargain bin shoppers at Walmart, you know? And that was about as specific as she could get. And I will say that it is sometimes hard to get more. Sometimes it's easier to list out who is not my ideal customer rather than who is. But I will also say that that is one of the things that I have learned from talking to people who have been in the direct-to-consumer meat business longer than me. So like surrounding myself with that team of other people who are doing this, is that they can share more of their successes and what has worked for them, and whether, you know, it's a health-conscious consumer or whether it's a grilling aficionado or whether it's a busy mom who needs easy meals, you know, things like that. Sometimes that's where having the experts that have, like you and I, Stephen, that have talked to hundreds of farms and seen their perspectives is really helpful versus just being you by yourself in a silo trying to figure it out based on the limited data that you have from your own farm, right?
Yeah, the community aspect. And I think that's something that I've seen with Chop Local, right? Is that I think you guys kind of cultivate more of a community around.
We try to. I mean, that's what this podcast is about, is we try to get producers on here a lot so that people can hear directly from them. So, yeah.
Yeah, super valuable.
Okay, so we've gone through, I think, 4 of the possible ways to use the funding. We stopped on marketing because it's my favorite. What's the 5th one?
Right, I should have ended with marketing. I think number 5 might be a little bit underwhelming after that. But number 5 is probably just like supplies in general. And so examples would be, you could do things like mileage, right? If you're delivering or going to a farmer's market, if you put like a special, you put it in a special box, right? You're paying for any of those kind of supplies. Or if you're shipping it direct to consumer, I know a lot of your audience does. Because I plug Chop Local University all the time, especially for shipping, I think is the number one resource that I will point people towards when they're interested in exploring shipping.
And we always tell people your shipping supplies are going to be least expensive if you can buy a pallet load of them at a time. But that is a capital investment. And when people are looking at, I need a freezer and I need a pallet of shipping supplies and I need labels, you know, like that can be a lot of money to launch your shipping program all at once. So
the VAPG is actually pretty perfect for that, though, because it can pay for your shipping boxes, and then it can also pay for your postage. So a big thing with consumers nowadays is that they don't want to pay for shipping. They want it to be free shipping, right? And so how do you increase your price per pound on average and then offer free shipping? The grant can then pay for that, cover part of the cost of that free shipping. So that's, for people who do direct consumer shipping, that oftentimes is a pretty major piece of their budget, as well as the boxes and the like dry ice they put in it, or the liners, right? Whatever their particular approach is, and then the postage cost.
yeah, awesome. So as we're talking through this, I'm really envisioning like some producers that I've talked to are like, I'm doing 7 hours or 7 hours of farmers markets a week and I'm away from my family and it's just not working. I really want to transition to online with shipping. I feel like this value-added producer grant could really help them with those expenses or they wouldn't even have to transition to just online. They could hire somebody else to go Saturday mornings for them to the farmers market. That's maybe one way that people could use it. I've also seen this farm that I was talking about earlier. They really wanted to focus on subscription boxes, expanding by really focusing their marketing on getting subscription customers, which again, when you think about the long-term value of those customers, is a really great move. So we talked about doing email sequences that were specifically about why you should subscribe and that type of thing. What are some of the other use cases that you've seen for producers of meat specifically, that have really helped them grow their business? Or maybe not grow, yes, grow, but also shift it a little bit to fit better with where they want to go in the future.
Yes, I think the examples that you gave are ones that we see very commonly, right? So it's somebody who wants to expand either for the first time or are just wanting to invest more into shipping. So whether that's they're wanting to ship far, or they're wanting to like just go into the neighboring metropolitan areas. Usually we're targeting it more specifically. We want to target, somewhere nearby, maybe somewhere that's within 1 day ground shipping, so you can cut down a lot of those costs. We'll see people who are wanting to expand into more farmers markets. Maybe they've already found success in some, or they haven't tried it as much, but they want to try new ones, so they're identifying new locations. We've seen people who are doing expansion at retail locations, both their own and other ones. So some people will have a farm store, or they have a retail store and they want to start a new one in a new location, or they want to start carrying new products, right? A new value-added product at a farm store that they have. Or we've seen ones where they want to sell through retail partners. They know, 10 different kind of farm store locations, and they want to buy freezers to put at these new locations that they can then stock with their beef, and, so that they have almost like a pop-up at a bunch of different locations. We'll see people who are trying to expand their wholesaling, whether that's to restaurants is pretty common, where they are focused more on volume instead of a direct-to-consumer approach. And so it's helping to cover the costs of bringing on more delivery drivers, going to another city that's maybe further away, and doing marketing to that particular audience. We've seen people who are doing wholesaling more at like an institutional level. And so maybe they're doing like the farm to school track, right? And so they're engaging more with that level, doing some like recipe development and more engaging on that side.
That's a lot of great options.
Yeah. I usually think about it in terms of market, right? Like what is the new market that you're trying to focus on? Who's your customer, right? And so that could be, maybe you have 3 different. Sometimes we'll do a combination where I'm working on one now where they want to go to a new city, but they want to expand both their restaurant sales and their direct-to-consumer, like farmers market sales in this new city. And so there's a lot of selection. The problem is that there's almost anything that you can do, right? And a lot of times my process is trying to help people figure out what is the right size, because usually it's the same amount of work, whether you're applying for a $250,000 grant or a $20,000 grant from the VAPG. You're doing the same amount of work. And so a lot of times I'm just trying to help people understand, how can we make it big enough that you can apply for, make it really worth your effort, but small enough so that you still have the option to continue to apply for this grant in the future, because kind of the broader you make it, the more doors you close for future applications.
Right, because then they say that you've already done that project, right?
Right. And so that's the challenge that I've had, where you can get this grant on your own, right? Like I know plenty of people who have applied for the Value Added Producer Grant and been successfully awarded it without any kind of outside help. But many times people will come to me and they'll have gotten their own VAPG, 3 years ago. And I look at their application and they put every single one of their products and every single one of their customer types. And then when we go to try to see what flexibility there would be to apply again, they're saying, well, you already did everything on this last one. And they could have done it a little bit differently just by narrowing the scope and being more specific, but they just weren't aware. And so they kind of shot themselves in the foot.
And that comes back to the value of working with a professional that's done this, dozens of times, right? So, yeah. I will tell people, because we did this the first time that we applied for a USDA grant, we applied and we did not get it. We got feedback from the reviewers, which was really valuable. I will be honest, when I first received the rejection, I read the feedback and I said, this is stupid, and I archived the email and left it alone. Okay. But I guess this is for the people who maybe they tried to write it themselves and it didn't work out, Go back now, a year later, or however long it's been, read the feedback again, and don't be afraid to apply again. And maybe you go to Stephen and say, look, I did a lot of the legwork already, Stephen. Like, now I just need help applying the feedback that they gave me to make it work. Because that has happened to us where we didn't get a grant the first year, we got it the second year. Then we applied for another USDA grant, didn't get it the first year, got valuable feedback, turned around and got the grant the second year. I probably could have shortened that timeline had I hired a professional in the first place. But I just want to put that out there, that don't give up if you didn't get it the first time. Don't say that, oh, this isn't for me, because it's still possible that you might get it again. So
I'm impressed, Katie. Even things like those LAMP grants, the LFPP, those are ones that a lot of people who are professionals, right? Because you're competing against nonprofits who live and breathe on grant funding. And a lot of times I've seen nonprofits who have applied 3 or 4 years in a row and have still not gotten it. So I think that's a testament to your ability, right?
well, I already told you it's a good thing that I don't like grant writing more, because
I think you're like you're clear. I think one of the biggest problems that people have is like they have a general idea of what they need to do, but it's really hard to think about in the future. I'm going to do this step, and then I'm going to do this step, and then I'm going to do this step, and be articulate. And I think you have the ability to do that really well.
But honestly, like we said earlier, to me, it is a business planning. That is what it's all about, because we just recently applied for another grant that was for providing education to producers, like the podcast, like the other things we've done through Chop Local University. Because the grant that we had that funded Chop Local University finished up this fall, and I want to continue to do it, but it takes time and it does not generate much money. So we've got to figure out a funding source. But anyway, as I was going through getting ready to write that grant, I really was not thinking about how do I use this grant money. I was thinking about, what does the next year of Chop Local University look like? What do I wish that I could have offered, or what do I wish I could offer more of through Chop Local University? What would that look like from a time standpoint for me? Do we need to add more people? Who are the partners on our grant, that could help us increase the impact through this, and those become partners in the grant? And that has been really helpful. The other thing that you and I have talked about, you taught me this early on, and I mentioned it before we got on air here, was that the grant application process, they provide you with basically a very large worksheet. We're talking, I don't know how long, what the maximum value added producer grant is, but 18 to 33 pages, something like that, I think is like the limit for some of these USDA grants.
Ours are like 50 pages usually when we do the VAPG. Yeah.
50 pages. Okay. So they give you a worksheet, and you could, most people were taught in school to start at the top of the worksheet and go down, right? But after you fill out the basics about your business and your, what the legal business name is and who the contact information is, the first question is usually something about a project narrative, and it's a very general overview of what you want to do in your grant. And I know when I approached grant writing for the first time, I looked at it and I was like, oh, write my project narrative. That's what I do first. And then I go down to the next part, and later on, you get into the objectives, you get into the budget, you get into a timeline of the activities, you get into your project partners. And what you told me, Stephen, was, stop, Katie, do not write your project narrative yet. Go to those sections that are kind of more like bullet points, that have the objectives, the outcomes, the budget, the activities. Get all of those things squared away first, and then go back and write the narrative parts that are the paragraphs. So don't necessarily do it in order, because it gets really hard that way.
Big tip. I'm glad that really stuck with you. I think that's something I harp on a lot. And we were also talking before we got going about how AI really supports that style too. I think a lot of people, you can tell when they're using AI because they start at the top and they're just like, all right, I want to apply for this grant, right? Fill out the application. And AI does great at filling a lot of space with no information and making it kind of seem, if you're not reading it too closely, it seems like it's really saying something, but it's not.
Yes, yes.
But I'm a big fan of AI, and I think that if you start with your budget and your work plan, and AI can help you kind of like to, if you give it the right information to make those do those well, and then you have the budget and the work plan, you work on the objectives, and you like kind of go through this different process. By the time you get to your narrative, you can just say, all right, now tell me what my need is. What's the need based on all this other information you already have? And it can do a great job.
We need to have a webinar this in 2026 that's about using AI for farmers and butchers, because, you know, what I've found is that AI is only as good as the prompt that you give it, right? And in the case of grant writing, I feel like the prompt that you give it needs to be more in depth than what you're expecting, you know? But what I did for this last one is I prompted it with, here's the RFP. So here's a document that you need to read through. And first I had it read through and summarize it for me. And then I also went in and I said, here are my objectives, here are my outcomes, here are my project activities. I did all of those, what I call the bullet point sections, you know, that don't require flowery words that only fit within 200 words or whatever it is, you know. But I gave it all of this concrete data that was part of my plan in my head. And then I asked it to write the narrative, and I asked it to check for consistency. It did. Let me tell you what it did. It did add a sentence to the overall project out narrative that said, farmers are particularly interested in learning about using AI in their marketing. That was not included anywhere in anything that I gave it. So that's why you proofread, and maybe it got that information somewhere else on the internet, you know, but it was not in what I prompted it with, and that was not part of my application. So I did remove that. But it really did streamline the process for me. And even more so, we joke about our coworker ChatGPT, but it made it feel doable for me. You know, it made the whole application a little bit less intimidating when I was in a time crunch, which generally happens with grant applications. You just end up in a time crunch somehow. So,
yeah, I'm actually going to be speaking at a couple of conferences over the next year about AI, using AI with grant writing. So this is a topic I've been giving a lot of thought to. And I feel like in the sustainable agriculture world, there's kind of like two camps. There's, some people are pretty pro, but then there's almost like this aversion just because, especially like there's an environmental cost, right? And there's kind of like almost this societal caution around it, which I think is wise. But I think it's going to be the most amazing tool if we can figure out how to do it well, right? Do it responsibly, ethically, which I've created kind of like a resource about that, and continuing to refine it through these educational things I'm doing over the next year. But I think it's one of the most amazing opportunities for your smaller scale sustainable agricultural farmers, because a lot of people will never hire somebody like me, right? And I think that's fair.
it's not for everybody, right? Yeah.
It's definitely not for everybody, but this can give you the opportunity to still have a much higher quality output than what you are willing to put the time into, if you kind of understand how to do it. And I like, you mentioned the word prompt. I like to use the word context, where it's, if you're starting out and you're trying to like get an answer, I like to think of AI as like an intern, where it's, you can't just give it, say one thing to it and then it gives you back what you need. It's like, you need to like, there's a lot more back and forth and a lot of like building context over time where it can actually understand what is going on. And so, yeah, how do you take it through that process so that it understands all the nuances of your situation and then can give you kind of what you need?
Yep. And I totally am with you, because I do have mixed feelings about it sometimes. But what I always come back to is that I'm not asking it to create something from scratch most of the time, or, you know, one of our best use cases that we've used it for, and I know we're getting off the track a little bit here, but one of the best use cases that for us has been a program that we use to go through our webinars. We feed it the webinar, right? These are our words. This is our knowledge. This is what we have come up with. And it can create summaries and blog posts and bullet points and emails. And all it's doing is it's taking, what I might have an intern do by summarizing the webinar content. And it's not creating a webinar for me. It's not taking the knowledge of another expert online and making a blog post about that. It is taking what we've created and just enhancing it and making it so much better for our producers and for our audience. And that's where I think that it can be really valuable. I think one of my core values in business, we talked about I love relationships. That's true, but I also, efficiency is one of my core values, and I cannot turn away from something like this that makes me so much more efficient. And so it is just a delicate balance of figuring out how to use it to our advantage without it being super obvious every time that it's been AI. So,
yeah. And if you leave it to, I think part of me is I like efficiency. I also, there's something about like justice or just like that I feel where I know the people who are going to use it, there are a lot of people who are going to use it in a predatory way. It's like, man, but can you imagine if businesses like ours can use it in a way that then we're able to offer a cheaper price or a better service to people instead of just using it to reduce our costs and have more profit for ourselves? Like, I think that's what the call is like, I'm really big fan of stewardship. And I think technology is something that needs to be stewarded, and to leave something and not use it at all is like burying your talent, right? It's like, you're not actually stewarding it if you're just completely rejecting it out of hand. So
let's use these resources for good, because we know that the people who aren't using them for good are going to use them anyway, right? So AI for good. That's it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a TM. We should trademark that one too, if it's not already.
All right, everybody. This has been certainly enjoyable for Stephen and I. We've been talking for 90 minutes now. I hope that it has been educational for you too. And these grant applications, or the requests for proposals or requests for applications is what they're called. These announcements should be coming out in December, we're thinking. So this is very timely, and we will probably have more opportunities to learn from Stephen, but definitely check out his website at stewardsunlimited.com. Sign up for those grant alerts so that you will get the emails when they come out, and get in touch with either of us if you have questions. All right. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Katie. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Meat Success. We hope this episode gave you fresh insights and inspiration to beef up your meat marketing. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, follow us on social, and share with your fellow farmers and butchers. Have questions or ideas for future podcasts? Reach out to choplocaluniversity.com. Until next time, remember, there's more than one recipe for meat success.